Thank you, Joe. And I would agree that last song does slap. And that'll probably sound a little weird on the YouTube recording, so Joe Horton, you can feel free to start it now. Happy Sabbath, everyone. Today I'm going to go through the evolution of military armor. We'll look from around 1500 BC to today and see how man-made armor has adapted. Then we will turn over to review the whole armor of God and see how that spiritual armor compares to that made of man. Early developments of armor were made from the pelt of tough animals, like a rhinoceros or an alligator or an elephant. I want to believe that early hunters of these large animals probably used some sort of armor or shield to protect themselves, but if you get hit by an elephant trunk, probably doesn't matter if you've got a shield, it's going to hurt. Many examples of early Asian armor around 1300 BC were made up of 6 layers of woven rhinoceros or ox skin. Fabric or pelt armor was still used largely up through even the 13th century by the Mongols. So all in all, pelt armor was used for around 2,600 years in combat, and today many groups still use that pelt or fabric for ceremonial purposes. Following this more barbaric armor, there was a development of chainmail. Chainmail was developed around 500 BC by the Eastern European empires. While there were some examples of plate armor in the Roman military, after the fall of the Roman Empire, a lot of that technology was lost in Europe and it wasn't deployed again for several years. Chainmail is a sequence of interlocking iron or steel rings that are riveted in place. The advantage of this is that it's largely flexible but still resistant to a slashing blow like a sword. And while pelt armor had many of the same properties, the metal, of course, allowed for a little bit more durable of a shell but weighed around 50 pounds. While chainmail was better suited for the battle of the time, warriors quickly found out that it has a weakness of a thrusting weapon like a spear. Through that development of battle technique, soldiers started underlaying parts of that chainmail with metal plates. First, knee protectors were covered in mail plates, then the rest of the legs and arms, and once they got to the breastplate, you essentially had a full suit of shining armor. From about 1400 to 1620, the full plate armor was the main outfit. This move partly came from the move from iron mail to more forged metals. These forged metals had a tougher material property, and plate mail was able to withstand both slashing and piercing attacks. But it would weigh up to close to 90 pounds for jousting armor. Around the 17th and 18th century, the lack of mobility and cost of production eventually proved ineffective, and many contemporary weapons began to damage and penetrate even the more durable suits. So at that point, people went to a very reduced amount of armor. They still protected their heads, their breastplates, and their backs, but they were looking for more mobility, a little bit lighter, and they eventually just kind of settled with that. And then into modern history, we of course have weapons that would outclass any form of that types of armor in the past. But much of the modern armor race has caught up. With bullet-resistant vests and helmets, many soldiers today are able to protect their vitals while traveling relatively light. While many other materials are carried when traveling from camp to camp, the modern soldier wears about 45 pounds of protection. So let's turn over to Ephesians 6. In Ephesians 6 and verse 10, and we will look through the whole armor of God. While the armor changes over the years, the core fundamentals are still the same. Soldiers still use some sort of material, whether it be metal, whether it be bullet-resistant material, or skin, to resist the chance of serious injury. It's just that with the arms race, they've had to adjust the way that they protect themselves from these attacks. From ox skin to chainmail to plate armor to bullet resistance, it's kind of just evolved with the arms race. So Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Stand therefore, having girded your waist with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. I started my preparation for this sermonette thinking, what challenges do we face today that are more focused or more powerful, and how has our spiritual armor changed? Because we do face more focused and more powerful challenges today, different, a lot of the same, it's just in different techniques to attack us. Then as I really thought about it, I came to the conclusion that the whole armor of God is whole. Shocking, you know. Truth, righteousness, peace, faith, salvation, and the word of God. We don't need anything else on top of that to protect us from the attacks of Satan. Paul shared this metaphor to show the foundational beliefs of God can protect and prepare you in any situation and against any attack. While the spiritual armor of God is far different from the evolution of man-made armor, Paul still used the visual aid of armor to allow the Ephesians to relate to the call. With that being said, here are 3 points that I was able to draw out of this comparison, 3 points to allow us to better understand these verses. Point number 1, God's armor does not have weak points. Man-made military armor found weak points because the enemy became smarter, stronger, and more precise. That armor was made to defend from ever-evolving munitions. The whole armor of God is here to defend us against the same enemy as it always has, Satan. Sure, he tries new, crafty ways to try to break us down, but the foundational aspects of this armor are strong and stay with us. The weak points only come up when we don't wear pieces of this armor. If I don't put on the shoes of the gospel of peace, my mindset can wither, and I will be more susceptible to a fatal blow by Satan. If we do not carry the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, then we'll perpetually be pushed back without being able to advance ourselves forward. Point number 2, God's armor rallies. This isn't just a battle that we each individually face. That's part of it. But the larger battle is one that we collectively as a church face. Here I'll pull quickly from 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 8. For if the trumpet makes an uncertain sound, who will prepare for battle? If I, for example, gird my waist with only the partial truth, others won't rally around it. If we put on just one shoe of peace, and then the other shoe that we put on is a little bit more wild, that uncertainty won't rally others to prepare as well. But if we carry ourselves upright and with the full armor of God, it can be contagious. And point number 3, God's armor isn't light. As man-made armor evolved, it generally became more and more heavy. Until modern advances, it was pretty much just put as much stuff on your body as you can to withstand from those attacks. And mini-suits got to be close to 100 pounds. Not just anyone can come off the street and put on 50 pounds of chainmail and run into battle. Only the people who have trained to be able to hold it and withstand it. If chainmail was 5 pounds, this would be a completely different story if it had the same effectiveness. Then everybody would be able to throw it on and wear it and hold it. I believe that God's armor is very heavy. Yes, I also believe that God's yoke is easy and God's burden is light, but that is only once you submit yourself to him. For many people, truth, righteousness, peace, faith, salvation, and the word of God are too heavy to hold. God will back you up and continue to lighten your load if you act in truth, righteousness, and faith. Although the armor of God is heavy, it is through God that it is easy to carry. I started my preparation for this sermonette imagining how we can hone in the armor of God in a modern world. But what I came to find was a perfect creation by God given to us through the words of Paul. While man-made armor continually has to adapt to its enemy, God's armor is whole, and its fundamentals will protect us now and forever.